This is the Truth Network.
Coming to you from an entrenched barricade deep in the heart of central North Carolina. Masculine Journey After Hours. A time to go deeper and be more transparent on the topic covered on this week's broadcast. So sit back and join us on this adventure. The Masculine Journey After Hours starts here now.
Welcome to Masculine Journey After Hours. We just say on this part of the show, you better just grab onto something pretty sturdy. Because there's a lot to talk about on the show that we just left. This whole loving like Jesus, and especially loving somebody in a relationship, a man-to-woman relationship, a marriage, dating, those types of things. And what's that really mean to love like Jesus? And Robbie, we were talking, off the air before we came on for the After Hours, and you were mentioning there are really just three veins that we could really dive into, and the first one kind of being tenderness. So if you want to tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. The picture of Jean Valjean, which we have a clip along these lines, that we just saw how he was completely fierce against her enemy, and later on we're going to show a clip. You can see how tender he was towards her brokenness. She considered herself to be a whore and considered herself, damaged goods. And so just like all men are wounded, all women are wounded, and understanding their brokenness, and rather than running from it, which, we will run and we will live. This is a scene from Braveheart. But, my first wife, it just brings me back to a place that I don't necessarily want to go, but I can't help but think about it. My first wife was schizophrenic. And, I'll never forget some of those moments of discovering how sick she was. Mm-hmm. And trying to understand how my life was going to work in that. And she would hear voices. And sometimes she would think I was doing things I wasn't actually doing. And she would hit me. I mean, literally, like she had superhuman strength. Like our guy, like, man, when she hit you because she thought, something was horrible, she really would hit you. And trying to figure out, I was not a Christian, of what do I do with this? How can I respond to this without just becoming furious, right? Which was the natural response that I was experiencing. And now I look back on, wow, what an opportunity I had to love a really broken person. And would love, and maybe in heaven we can have this discussion. The fascinating thing is Debbie called me 2 or 3 days before she died. She died of diabetes complications. And at this point in time, I'd been married to Tammy for, probably 25 years, or maybe 24 years, something like that. And I'll never forget that phone call. It's like I hadn't heard from her in all these years. I just wanted to tell you I loved you before I died. And she knew she was dying. And I was like, Debbie, you're not dying, because as usual, I think she's exaggerating and all this. And she goes, no, I really am. And I just need you to know that I always loved you. And, there's something about me that just says, wow, God, if I'd, had a chance to walk in this message and know some things now that I knew then about being tender towards somebody that was really, really, really broken, and what would have that possibly meant for her life had I been able to love her well.
Yeah, it's very hard a lot of times to handle somebody else's heart better than you handle your own. And until you really can walk with God and get some healing, you tend to not do that as well, right? Now, some people are better at it than others, but, it's really, really hard to love somebody when you don't really love yourself very well.
And it has to be authentic.
Yeah.
If you're, like you said earlier, if you're coming at it from a different perspective and you're just trying to say the nice things, people see through that all the time. I've watched that when I'm sincere or not sincere with my wife, and she can read me like a book, and trying to say something tender or something nice when you really are not there and you don't mean it, it just makes it worse.
Mm-hmm.
honesty is the best policy, and you have to figure out a way to sometimes just bow out, maybe, and not say much. Try and like the nail in the head. It's like, don't try to fix it, just listen. It really is a good advice, and I try to take that better now.
It's not the nail, Robbie.
Right.
Rodney. I'm doing it again. I need like a fourth or fifth person in here to stand so I can see different faces in here. Yeah, I want to get back to the place real quick on a clip. I want to go back to the story of Bill Murray, because I think what you'll find here is we're going to judge him by what we hear, but I think sometimes we're a lot closer to being like him than we think we are when we're really honest with ourselves. So I want to pick up the story of him and Nancy. Now, he loves a lady named Rita, but he's making the moves on Nancy, which we heard in the last episode where he learned that she was in Mrs. Walsh's class and they were at the same Lincoln High School, and he makes all this up to meet her. And so we pick up the story a little bit later on after their date. And so I want to kind of listen to how that plays out, and we'll come back and talk about it.
Phil.
Oh, Rita.
Who's Rita?
How should I know?
What is this, some kind of one-night stand?
On the contrary, Nancy, I love you. I've always loved you. This is going to seem sudden, but... Nancy, will you be my wife?
Oh, Phil.
Rita.
Nancy.
Whatever.
That's not a good clip.
And the clip it always reminds me of is Despicable Me.
Yeah, it's really not a good clip, and maybe we're not quite to that point, but I think there are times that we, as we talked about in the previous show, that we do things with the hopes or the intentions of an outcome happening, right? If I can say the right thing, I can do the right thing, I can give the right gift, the outcome's going to be favorable on my end. And again, that's the whole wrong mentality, and it's easy to look at that and maybe judge it, but it's coming from a very broken place. He's coming from a place where he's trying to get some type of answer that she's not going to be able to give him long term. It's going to be fleeting, as we talked about before, unless he can really get those answers from God. And then once he can start getting them and walking with God, he can really then start to step into that place where he can help her with her tenderness, to be tender towards her, because he's coming from a healthier place. Right? Andy, what would you add to that?
Oh, man, I thought you were going to give me the next question, so that's Sam's being Sam.
Thank you. You're welcome.
I've been sitting here thinking about just being fierce and going after a woman's heart, and how it's totally, he's doing the wrong thing there. But a lot of times I think we don't know how. We've never seen it modeled before us a lot of times before from our examples of really how to properly go after a woman's heart that's not selfish, that's not looking out for our own benefit, not taking a question to them, not looking for something external from them, and being able to take our strength to them. We just don't see that often. I mean, I had a very good dad. He was good to my mom, but do I remember examples as a kid of really being able to see that? There were times he did excellent, but from a day-to-day basis, I probably didn't always see the greatest example. And I think a lot of us, from what I've heard from the masculine journey, is a lot of us didn't always see those examples. Not to put it on somebody else, we really need to lean in and let Jesus show us how to do those things from the examples that he gives in his word and just from our personal interaction with him. But like I say, I think a lot of us come from a broken place of not really knowing how to give that.
That's a great point. And so I'm going to throw out a question to Harold here in a second that I didn't prep him for. So you guys are usually used to that setting here in the studio. But when you look at Scripture, Harold, how did Jesus love others? What was some of the things that he did that we could model ourselves after?
I think one of the greatest things that he did was he looked for the needs that people had and addressed those. And I think that when we can do that for our wife, that's one of the greatest things that we can do. An example in our marriage, for years and years, my sweetheart would ask me, didn't I want her to get a degree? Well, I knew how important a college degree was to her because she had a lot of cousins and brother and so forth that had degrees. She had been told that she could not go to college or she would have a nervous breakdown because she had to have straight A's and so forth. And so my response to her was, it was a true response. It wasn't a Bill Murray type game. It was, you don't need a degree from me. And that was true. But I knew how important it was for her. And so when she finally decided that she was going to go for it, I did everything I could to help her out. I did library research. I typed papers. I supported her in every way I could. In fact, I kept her from quitting at front. That woman got her undergraduate teaching degree with a 4.0 grade point average, and yet she would never sleep the night before an exam because she never felt like she knew the material well enough. So my support, she mentions it constantly to other people about that she could never have gotten that degree without me. I don't know if that's true or not, but I love hearing it. And knowing a person's real needs and being able to try to address them, I think is extremely important. Making them feel that they are on a pedestal. I always open the car door for my wife. I don't know, many people that do that nowadays, but I love doing it. I try to show her that she is so important to me that I want to go out of my way to show that not only to her but to other people that she's special because she's special to me. And I think that that's a way that we can show love.
Thank you, Harold. Now, Robbie, what's some other thoughts that you have on examples Jesus set on loving others?
Yeah, he was, fortunately for all of us, very intimate. I mean, he went deep even when it could mean trouble, but and often with such grace that, it's still like beautiful when you look at the conversation he had with the woman at the well, right? I mean, when he just throws it out there, well, just call your husband. That's a really intimate thing he just did with a completely inappropriate in his culture to even speak to a Samaritan woman. Now he's going to talk about her lack of a husband and the fact that she's had 5 of. In other words, he really goes deep into her story, knowing her story, in order to go after, some real healing in there, and that gets to the intimacy that, fortunately, I think you would agree with me, Sam. It feels really good on our end to be intimate, where we get to tell our story, but we also get to hear. They're like, this is real life right here.
Yeah, it is. I think in the realm of a relationship, that intimacy is very appropriate, right? But if you're just starting to date somebody, you got to be very careful about getting intimate. And I don't mean physically. Yes, that plays into it, but I mean emotionally, conversationally intimate, because a lot of times it can go deep. For me, after my wife and I split up, I didn't really think of it as taking my question to the woman, so to speak. But, I got out and I would start dating, and I was just used to be very transparent around these guys and being around other people. And I knew a lot about a woman's heart because we talk about it. We try to learn about it. and too often I found myself in a really not a great place where the female would feel like we were a lot more intimate relationally than where I really thought we were. And when I had to peel that back, it was really my own fault for going deep when it wasn't the right time to go deep, if that makes any sense. And so I think it all depends on the relationship you're in, on that part of that intimacy. If you're not planning on staying with that person long term, you got to let God really guide that intimacy on how deep you go as far as conversation, relationally sharing. Because
Go ahead, Andy.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that and what we know about the woman's heart, we know that intimacy and that vulnerability, women don't see that all the time, and that is very attractive. So it can confuse them in those situations, I think.
And I think it's really a beautiful thing about the clip you're fixed to show is that here we do have an example of Jean Valjean.
You can't see it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Get ready to play.
This is a genuine strength, and this is being tender for a lady who's really broken.
And he's able to be intimate by speaking truth into her life.
Right.
Right. And so I think that's important that we glean that from it. But we're going to listen. What's happened is right after the scene we left in the last show that we did, right from the jail, she collapses, and he ends up having her taken to his house, and he's talking with the doctor about her situation, and then it moves into his conversation with her. You'll hear a point where you hear a sound, and he's trying to remove her wet clothes so that he can get her dried out.
I doubt she'll survive. She talks continually about Cosette. Who's that?
A daughter.
She needs all the will to fight the infection in her lungs. Perhaps if the girl were with her.
I understand. Thank you, Doctor.
You'll need nurses. I can't arrange for them till the morning. What about tonight?
I'll take care of her tonight.
Keep her body warm and her head cool. Good night.
Why did the gossip bother you? You didn't have to fire me.
Clothes are damp. I have to get you some dries.
It's all right. There'd be no charge. You deserve it. But I don't understand why you're being so kind.
I was preoccupied. I didn't know if you'd come straight to me. None of this.
You don't want to kiss.
I want you to rest. And don't worry. I'll bring your daughter to you.
You're going to the Thénardiers?
No, I can't. I'll send the money to bring Cosette here.
She can't live with me.
Of course she can. She will. She'll attend the school and you won't have any more worries. When you're better, I'll find work for you.
But you don't understand. I'm a whore. And Cosette has no father.
She has the Lord. He is her father. And you're his creation. In his eyes, you've never been anything but an innocent and beautiful woman.
Now, Robbie, he obviously is pretty intimate there.
Yeah.
But, I mean, he's sharing God's truth to her, right?
Right. It's absolute grace that, fortunately for us, we know the beginning of the story is he had similar self-image problems. He thought he was a convict. Mm-hmm. And God had, through the bishop, given him unmerited favor, very similar to what he is now offering to her, Fantine. And so it's fascinating to me to know the story, like, oh my goodness, look what God stepped in and gave Jean Valjean, and now look what he is giving to Fantine. So in my own story, what does that look like? What did he step in and forgive me of? And then, when I'm sitting there so easy and so quick to judge, not just my wife, but, I deal with a lot of different women every day of my life. And I even think of one I really struggled with, a Jesus Labor Love lady. And oh man, I kept on telling the Lord I didn't want to deal with her. But I am so glad that I went past that. He got me to be obedient. And this week, it just so happened that the ministry was able to really help her in a time when she really needed it. And she completely knew that was from God. And just like, I think we all hope that Fontaine knew that this message was coming from God himself, not from Jean Valjean.
Yeah, I think when you look at the differences in the intimacy that was in the clip and what I was talking about, he didn't share his story. He didn't share his vulnerability. Right? He just spoke the truth about God's love to her.
Right.
Right? And spoke into her story. Right? And you can do that with anyone. Right? You can speak God's love into anyone's story that he calls you to be a part of their life. It's their difference there between that and sharing your own vulnerability, which can confuse some things.
Yeah, but if you're also in that relationship for a long time and you've never really shared or never cared enough when she was sharing, right? You listened, but you really didn't listen. You didn't hear. So opening up and being able to enter into that relationship, being vulnerable yourself, so that she can be, because most often they usually are first. So you're going to have to, be open to hearing and just listening and understanding, not trying to fix like I like to do. You know?
And there's a big difference between listening and hearing.
Yes.
Yeah, I can listen to lots of things and never really hear them.
Yeah. And with that sympathetic ear of wanting to understand and go deeper and ask questions that take you more intimately and deeper with her, that brings out more of who she really is and what it is about her, that why does this bother you this much? And then again, constantly, like you said, you offer Jesus, but as a individual, you need to offer yourself into that, because you do have that intimate marriage relationship. So you're going to have to enter in and be vulnerable yourself. And I don't know how to fix this, but together we'll figure it out. And here's where I'm hurting and what's going on with me, because, when you're vulnerable, just like Andy was saying, that is intimacy for that relationship that you really need to foster.
And it's so key to walk with God through each one of those steps. If I step out and I'm vulnerable, but she's not at a place to hear it, and I just do it out on my own, there can be some wounding coming back. I got to be willing to say, okay, God, I'm going to let you tell me, I'm going to let you lead me on when to share some of this stuff, right? And when not to, when to speak, when to ask questions, when to try to not fix something. All those things. If it's left to my own, I'm going to screw it up.
It's a wonderful opportunity for prayer, especially for me, because I go, okay, I got nothing. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Andy.
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, that's where I really struggled, was that I think I genuinely wanted to do right, but it seems like whenever I was supposed to zig, I always zagged. I always did the opposite of what I was supposed to. And if I would have leaned into the Lord much more than what I actually did, and that's where I think when you get healed up and whenever you begin to see that He's your sustaining, He's there sustaining you and giving you direction, and you don't have, now I feel like I just go to that much more, and I get His wisdom, because it's all within our own strength when we're doing it. You can do it all out of right motive and wanting to do that, but you end up doing the wrong thing, and that's what I continually did, or I felt like.
Well, I'm with you completely, and it's amazing how He gives me little baby steps to do stuff, because the hard stuff, I'm not smart enough to figure out, oh, this is when I need to pray. This is when I need to jump in. But my wife had, or has, restless leg syndrome, and so sometimes she would struggle to sleep. And, just, really, really a problem. And I went to the NRB, and this guy, Spiritual Warfare, had these stakes. And on these stakes, like tent stakes, are Bible verses. And he was talking about what tremendous results he had by putting these stakes in the ground and around people that were having warfare problems. And so as part of the John Eldridge's daily prayer, you say, I'm going to bring the kingdom of God, and I'm staking it here in Jesus' name. So these stakes really made sense to me. So I go home. I said, Tammy, I got these stakes. And these aren't steaks you can eat. These are steaks you put in the ground. And they got Bible verses on them. I really want to pray over your restless leg, and I'm going to stake it in Jesus' name in all four corners of the. And so I got the stakes one night. I went out and staked them, and I prayed. And guess what? I know you're thinking, it worked. Well, it did. I mean, it's supposed to, but it was actually warfare that was going on to some extent. And now it's not like she's just like never ever has another, bump with her leg in the middle of it, but nothing like where she could get no sleep and no rest. And maybe it's just God coming in and comfort her. I don't know. But what I do know is, oh man, I got a chance to play the man. I got to be fierce up against her enemy. And it really felt like, man, I got to love my wife well, and in a baby way. This wasn't all that intimate a thing.
But you were tender, right? You stepped out on her behalf.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's a risk there.
You were gone, you were away, and you were still thinking about her and her situation and putting her in front of your needs at that time.
So we have a couple minutes left. We have less than a minute left. So any parting words you want to give other than walk with God, which is obviously what we always want to say. Yeah, Jesus, walk with God. Anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I think that the last thing I would say is women fear abandonment. And it's so easy for us to wound them there. Like, I'm going to go. Because that just, like, even if you walk out and heated in an argument, you're in a situation to really wound them.
Yeah, and it does wound them. And you can abandon them emotionally, you can abandon them physically, you can abandon them a lot of different ways. And realizing that that's the big fear. And so just making steps to make sure you don't do that and feed to that fear. Join us next week. See you then.